Hello, in my last two videos we've built a Proto Indo European family tree based on the creation myth and talking about the primordial being of the same family tree. Now some of you are saying you had problems with the first video I made in terms of audio, so I've linked that again in the first video, so if you play it again there'll be a link taking you to a working video, just so you know. And in this video I'm now going to talk about some more proof from the creation myth by looking at sky gods, thunder gods and dragon myths, just to show further proof lower down this family tree, sort of deep into the religions, that there were more commonly sourced myths, all going back to the Proto Indo Europeans. I'll link the first two videos above now in the description in case you wish to watch those first or later. And for those of you who want to see how the gods evolved, then this is a video for you. So welcome to the Proto Indo European creation myth part 3, sky gods, thunder gods and dragons. And welcome to Crackenford. So a synopsis, if you haven't watched the previous two videos, is that we have a family tree of religion showing that Old Norse myths were as close to this source as possible, and how Indo-Iranian myths split into two. And we also showed how primordial beings, those that existed at the very start of the cosmos in those creation myths, were all linked to the twins Manus and Yimo, the twins from the very original source creation myth. Today we'll look at other myths and gods to show further proof of the descendants from the Proto Indo Europeans, and how names and stories changed over time and over distance as the culture spread. Please also keep in view this is a very high level view of the subject, and I could easily make individual videos about each god of each culture and each myth, and to be honest I'll probably end up doing that anyway, because I wrote hours of material just for this video, and so for now I've sort of condensed that down into a consumable size to allow you to just understand probably key evidence points that will help support this cultural and religious evolution from the Proto-Indo-Europeans. And if you want to help to support me in making these videos, then please like this video, subscribe to the channel. It is free to do and only takes a few seconds, and really does support me and gets these videos shown to a wider audience, which can only be a good thing. So thank you for all those who do that. So to start off, we're going to look at the primordial beings' names again for the last video, just to familiarise ourselves with how the culture spread and how the names evolved. So we had Yimo and Manus at the top, the original twins from the earliest Proto-Indo-European creation myth, or the earliest one we can recreate. And this myth spread from around the Black Sea, went east into the Indo-Iranian myth, and then west into the Old Norse myth via Germania. Now, India's primordial being was called Purusa, and that means cosmic being. And that name developed over time from the Indo-Iranian myth. The other part of that, the Iranian myth, they had Gaomart, and that came from a rewriting of the myth by Zoroaster, but while still linking directly to Yima, and I explained that sort of rather complex link in my last video. The Roman and Greek myths do have a resemblance of alignment to the original creation myth, but one really needs to consider that the Greek myth is sort of like a third generation of the story, reflected from an already rewritten story by Zoroaster in Persia, and so it doesn't look on the surface like the original creation myth, certainly as a whole, but there are elements of it, of that myth, that can be observed as reflecting the original myth. And the Roman myth as well is very influenced by the Greek culture at this point, and so that explains the naming of some of the gods and the reshaping of the myths. So the Greek and Roman creation myth primordial beings are Kronos and Saturn respectively, and these beings represent the equivalent of Yimo from the original Proto-Indo-European myth, but there is also an equivalent of Manus, and that's in the gods Uranus and Callias respectively, although in the Greek and Roman myths Uranus and castrate the primordial being rather than sacrifice or murder him, with these Manus equivalents both having names that mean the heavens. And the word Callius we eventually turned into celestial, so that you have a hard C in Latin, classical Latin, and that goes to a soft C. So Callius goes to Celius, they do celestial. So now we understand this, we can look at a couple of other god types which can be applied to this Proto Indo European family tree of religions to give us further evidence of proof that the culture and religion did spread from a single point. Now, the first god I want to look at is what would normally be considered the most powerful deity, and that is of Deus Futur, which means sky god father, which is sometimes also shortened to Deus, meaning sky god. And Deus was the first god created from the sacrifice of Yimo in the Proto Indo European creation myth. And as the myths moved with culture and the religions evolved, so did the name of the sky god. And to the east, the Vedic name for him was very similar, Deus Pitar, where Deus is etymologically equivalent of Zeus for the Greeks, but language developed a little more complexity in the West, and Deus Pitar turned into the Roman Jupiter. But Deus also etymologically in Germania went from Deus to Tiwaz, and Tiwaz went into Old Norse as Tyr, and again this can be heard in the last syllable of Jupiter. Now at this point let's divert and talk about Tyr briefly, because he's hardly mentioned in myths, poems or archaeological finds in the Old Norse world, which seems odd for such an important god, a sky god. Now some people think Tyr was replaced by Odin at a point in history, because Odin's popularity within the poems of the Eddas and with him often being referred to as the All-Father suggests he was the most powerful god. But personally I doubt that Odin was really called that, and evidence doesn't support the transition from Tyr to Odin. But I'll explain more about that in a very Tyr specific video soon, and I'll also do an Odin specific video. In fact, I'll do that next, about how he was created. But because we know the Old Norse myth is close to the Proto Indo European original, we also know the gods also changed a lot, and so without doubt he's had a longer period of time to have those god names changed. So that's why Tyr probably changed at some point, because so much time went along, things evolved. So let's go from clear skies, sun and heavens, to storms, lightning and particularly thunder and thunder gods. If you go down the family tree of religion into cultures and further distances away from each other in terms of where cultures settled, you get far more diversity. And thunder gods, being lower down in the tree, were far more diverse than the sky gods. So classical believers of gods still have yours Jupiter and Zeus with their lightning bolts, who were sky gods, but there were also thunder gods. But elsewhere around Europe there were separate storm gods, gods of thunder. Now at first glance the names of these thunder gods, they don't seem etymologically related because of the diversity, but if we go to one which has cognates with the others, we can try and work out relationships from there. And it's probably best to do that with a map which I'll put up of Europe to help understand the localization of the names. And to start off, we have the Baltic god of thunder, whose name was Perkinus. Now we know there are gods whose names are cognates with Perkinus, i.e. names that are related, and the first three we know of that are attested is the Lithuanian name of Perkinas, the Latvian Perkons, and the Old Prussian Perkinis. Now we can confirm these names as they're all mentioned in a book called the Elbing Glossary, which is like a dictionary type text dating back to around 1350 CE. Things we know about the Baltic god Perkinus is that he has some association with oak trees in his myths. It is the tree he typically strikes with lightning to catch fire, and believers of him, people who worship him, often place idols of him within oak trees, and they believe they could also get fire from within the trees themselves. To the south of the Baltic, there's the Celtic name of Talanis, which is their version of the thunder god, and that name had changed a number of times, and we believe there was an intermediate step where the Celts used the name Percunio, which was meaning wooded mountains. Now, whilst we can't be 100% sure that is exactly right, it would tie closely to a Gothic form of the word Ferguni and the Old English Fergen, which both mean mountain. And if we take them into account, and that the Germanic languages changes the P to an F and the K to a G as it develops, which isn't, well, it's a bit unusual, but it's not unheard of in pronunciational evolution, then you get etymology between the Germanic forms and the Old English forms of Fergen and the Baltic forms. So the question is this, you may ask: the Old Norse god of thunder was Thor, and the Old Germanic god of thunder was Thurnor. So that doesn't seem etymologically connected to Perkanos. So why is that? I mean, Thor was very much worshipped within the Old Norse. There's lots of jewellery, place names. Demonia was very popular. So why would the god of thunder be worshipped much more than, let's say, Odin? And then, as I say, have a name that isn't cognate with him? Well, whilst we associate Thor with thunder and lightning, he was more of a sky god. And in fact, there was another god in Old Norse called Fjorgyn, and this name is cognate with the Gothic and Old English around the mountain, and he was father of Frigg. And there's also a goddess called Fjorgyn, who is also known as Jörð, who was considered as the Earth Mother type goddess, and she was mother of Thor. And her name Fjorgyn, as I say, is mentioned within the Eddic poem, the Völuspá. So this version of the name, Fjorgyn, is cognate with the Old English Fjörg, and which we also just said corresponds directly with the Baltic god names Perkinos. So considering the etymology and the fact that Fjorgyn was the mother of Thor, it would make sense that she was probably actually the thunder god, or at least that name represented it, with Thor being the sky god. Now, for those who still wish to challenge this, saying Thor was the god of thunder, I will say that there is absolutely nothing preserved in the Eddas or texts where Thor does anything with thunder or storms. Nothing. However, I will concede that his name does have some mythologems that suggest he may have been at some point a thunder god, especially tales around his weapon and his goat-drawn chariot, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. So that sort of explains the thunder gods over a fair chunk of sort of mid and northern Europe. But if we head back south to Greece, where was their thunder god? And well, as I said, it was Zeus. Zeus was known as a sky god, but also a thunder god. And here it looks like Zeus actually took over that role. As we mentioned earlier, we mustn't forget Greece is a third generation of culture in terms of transition from the Proto Indo European family tree, and therefore had more changes to deal with it when adopting some of that culture from Persia. But before these changes, if there was a thunder god, he was probably called Keranos, which is a name given to Zeus's thunderbolt. We have found inscriptions dated from about the 5th century BCE saying Zeus Keranos. The reason why that could be considered a thunder god name is that it used to be common, a naming convention, that you use an old deity's name as like a surname to a new deity. And whilst there's no academically agreed etymology between Keranos and Perkanos, dropping the K shows phonetic similarities that must be considered more than coincidental. However, if we then flip to the other side of Persia and in India, the thunder god there was called Indras, and he was said to be the son of Dyaus, linking him to the sky god. However, there's no etymological connection between Indras and Perkanos, and so that name must have developed independently, and therefore you could say there is now some doubt that there was a central Proto-Indo-European storm god, which all these storm gods evolved from, because the names do not all tie up to that central point. But here we should also take note that the first recorded mention of Indras was around 1500 BCE, so he is not a new creation, he is a very ancient god. But let's add to that by looking at some of the properties, the powers of the gods, and we'll see that there are similarities in them that can link them. So these thunder gods across Europe, Persia and into India are always said to look angry with a fiery face and a beard. They hurled a weapon, a mace or an axe or occasionally a hammer, and some did have lightning bolts, and those weapons always used to return to their hand after they were thrown. Another similarity between these gods is they said to ride a cart or a chariot that is pulled by goats. Now this myth probably comes from the sound of a bird called a snipe, and that's a bird that when it flies its tail vibrates and it produces a goat-like bleating noise. So when it flies it sounds like there's a goat going over your head. So that's where that myth came from. So Indras and Perkinos were also sometimes perceived as a bull in their myths, which again is more than coincidental considering their distance apart from each other. But perhaps the most common mythology, the story of these gods, is that they all shared an enemy, a dragon of the ocean. In the Vedic culture, this was the Vitra. In the Old Norse, it was Jumunganda. In Greece, it was Zeus who fought Typhus. And these similarities in the age of Indras should remove any doubt about these gods not being from the same source. These dragon myths point to an Indo-European concept where there's a monstrous reptile laying in water or stopping access to water, a plot similar to a dragon protecting a magical spring. There were many monsters killed as part of heroic deeds these thunder gods went. However, when it came to this one major dragon, there's often ambiguity on whether it is actually killed, leaving the listener of the story to wonder, is it safe to go into the ocean? So, to help show further proof of this connection, the Vitra is a serpent, and the verb used to explain the slaying of a serpent in the Vedic hymns relates exactly to the same sort of term used in the Persian yasna, and cognates of that can be traced into the Indo-Iranian, Greek and Hittite stories. And there's also the Old Norse story where Thor fights the Midgard serpent, but like the Greek version is the sky god, who was maybe once the thunder god, fighting a serpent. And this again shows a pan-Indo-European consistency in the myth. So I'll read stories from these in another video, as they're a bit too long, but they're really interesting to listen to see the similarities and the differences. There is one last thing I want to talk about before I wrap up, and that is about a powerful group of gods. Many cultures had a term for this. In Old Norse, they were known as the Aesir, and they were considered a dominant force within the Old Norse culture, with an opposing group called the Vanir, who were giants. Now, for those familiar with Old Norse, you may think that that is a very specific Old Norse pairing. But within the Zoroastrian culture in Persia, there is a powerful god force called Ahura, and in the early Vedic culture in India, there was a powerful god force called Asura. All of these are cognates with Asir. They all seem to be from the same root word, again showing structures in pantheons that must all be related, stemming from a single Proto Indo European source. A culture that also had ocean gods and earth gods, storm gods, moon gods. And over the coming months, I will try and make videos on all of these. I want to summarise by saying that all these myths and cultures, we can see tangible evidence today that they all came from a single source around 8,000 years ago. And I hope this journey I've provided you with maybe information you didn't know, evidence you weren't aware of, that allows you to better understand and discuss the Proto Indo Europeans' hugely influential religious and cultural evolution, rather than just look at a few words like horse, house and wheel, which is often mentioned in videos about Proto Indo Europeans. And that was my aim here. But I have only just scratched the surface of these myths and these gods, and there's so much more to tell. So if you want more specific videos on this subject, then please comment below, like and subscribe to the video, talk to me on Facebook. There's often some good discussions going on there. You can direct message me on the Crackenfold. So thank you for your support so far. It has been amazing, and I've been blown away by the supporting emails and the questions and the people just starting discussions about many things, sharing stories. It's been absolutely a fantastic journey, these 3 videos, and I'll do more about these. The next video I'll do will be about Othin and the wild hunt. So until then, stay safe, stay well, and this was Crackenfold.